And we are live with Lincoln Bleaveans here today on PowerTalks by Energy.Media. Lincoln is the head of sustainability and energy management at Stanford University. We are very fortunate to have Lincoln with us today, and we look forward to his Power Talk. Thanks for being here, Lincoln.
Oh, you bet. Wouldn't miss it.
So what are you going to be talking about today?
Well, I'd like to give a brief explanation of how Stanford is, in my words, making sustainability innovation real. In other words, we are not just talking the talk about sustainability innovation in energy and a whole lot of other things, but actually putting our money where our mouth is. And frankly, a significant amount of money. We've invested over $1 billion in our power system so far to make it both operationally effective and environmentally effective. So really looking forward to talking about the project, but also the process that we use and the philosophy we use to do that.
Yeah, from what I've learned, Lincoln, I've been extremely impressed with Stanford and the progress that you've made towards greenhouse gas reductions. I really haven't seen any other entity, whether it's public or private, make that level of progress at scale. So I think it's huge with the culture of innovation that's out there in Silicon Valley being nearby. And it's exciting that these technologies are being able to be implemented at such a scale at university level, because then, of course, the next step is city level and state level and nation level.
Yeah, and that's actually what we're seeing since we've put, especially our thermal plant online back in 2015. We've had over 5,000 visitors from all over the world. 5,000 groups, actually. I think I can't even count visitors. 5,000 groups from all over the world looking to implement it, whether it's governments or institutions or corporates. And it's not just Palo Alto where the weather is great all the time. Everybody from folks in Florida, folks in the Scandinavian countries, China, India. We've been really fortunate and really hoping to be an exemplar and an inspiration for folks who can roll this out.
No, that's amazing. So I'll let you go ahead and present and take away your power talk. And I'm going to mute myself because the audience is here to listen to you. So look forward to hearing it.
Great.
Thanks, Lincoln.
Sure. Here, there we go. So here's where I started. Again, making energy sustainability innovation real. What we've done over the last 15 plus years is a project called Stanford Energy System Innovations, which we shortened to SESI. Full disclosure, I have been at Stanford for about 1.5 years now. I had very little to do with any of this. My predecessor, Joe Stagner, brilliant engineer, was really the father, the parent of all of this in terms of designing it and making it happen. I have the good fortune to be able to have an opportunity to tell a story as it's all come together, the final components. So let me go to the next slide. Quick intro into my background. I'm at Stanford now, but have really been lucky to fall into the energy space when things were really moving back in the independent power days in emerging markets. And most recently at Burbank Water and Power, where I ran the power supply side, but have been really lucky to see renewables and clean energy more broadly move from the edge of the conversation to the very center of the conversation. And on top of that, I do a lot of advising for clean tech startups, both in the US and in Europe and in India. And first of all, it's incredibly gratifying and a lot of fun, but it also helps me keep my gaze at and over the horizon, constantly being pushed to look forward, which is, I find is a really great way to do this, even though it involves a tremendous number of very early morning conference calls and a lot of coffee. So my goal today is really twofold. One is to explain the operational and strategic framework around what we do, and then do a deep dive into the energy part of that, and specifically the energy decarbonization journey that, again, we've been had underway for over 15 years now. So when we think about energy at Stanford, it's easiest to think of Stanford as a small to medium-sized city, full-service city, that happens to have a whole lot of Nobel Prize winners in it. It is a really unique environment, but ultimately a full-service city. We are very much self-contained in terms of the services that we as staff provide to the institution and the infrastructure that we run. When we look at energy, it really comes down to two products: thermal energy, which is heating and cooling for the whole campus on a district basis, and then electricity, which runs pretty much everything else. And because we run utilities, we are really touching every part of the university ecosystem in one way or the other. So the schools, the departments, the places like the athletic facilities, the hospitals. So we really do cover pretty much all the waterfront at Stanford. And we do that not just as the beating heart of Stanford 24/7 in terms of the thermal energy and electric energy, but we do that in an intensely collaborative environment, not just our operations folks, but convening all the incredible minds and very strong opinions around the Stanford community from a collaborative perspective to get to the right answer. And then looking out from a planning perspective over decades, and trying to not just position Stanford to succeed in the near term, but over the very long term. So it's a really fascinating environment, very high pressure environment for that, to make that happen. And like I said, we do that across the university, a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different customers, and some very ambitious goals that we layer on top of that. We are on track for zero out scopes 1 and 2, which is the electricity, the energy we produce, and the energy that we purchase. Zero out the greenhouse gases for those by 2030. But the mother of all goals is really zero net greenhouse gases for the university. In other words, scopes 1, 2, and 3, if you're familiar with those, by 2050. Now, there are two sides to that. One is that really no one in the world knows exactly how we're going to get there. We all have to point there, and we all have to work towards that, but nobody knows how to get there. The fun thing at Stanford is that we want to be the ones not only to figure out how to get there, but also to show the world in terms of actual investments, how that's done. We want to be both the ones who find the answer and the ones who implement the answer. So I talked about the beating heart of the university, 24/7, 360. The lights can't go out, just to put it mildly. But in this brave new world that we're in 2022, we add in even more complexity and even more unprecedented challenge. Endemic, not even pandemic anymore, endemic, and climate change. Mother Nature has put the world on notice that we have to do things differently. We have to do things better. And we've put ourselves on notice. Diversity, equity, inclusion, justice. Generation Z, they're not taking no for an answer. They're not even taking slow for an answer when we try to address all these problems, and rightly so. Then we layer on these ambitious, incredibly ambitious, and absolutely necessary goals that we as the world have to figure out. And it begs the question, how do we serve Stanford's mission, teaching and research? How do we serve this small, very, very high demand city of Stanford in these strange, confusing, and rapidly changing times? So I'm back here for a second and give you a broader view that I think will form the conversation. And this is really coming from me, Lincoln Bleaveans, and not from Stanford, but I think it helps. I am convinced that the human equation itself is changing. We have been living with a very durable and very consistent definition of success, at least since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, if not back to the development of agriculture 10,000 years ago. Safety, reliability, efficiency, customer satisfaction, most of all cost. You add those up and that's been success. That's been success for generations, if not centuries, if not millennia. I see that changing, and I see that changing very rapidly and very profoundly, in that in today's world, again, endemic climate change, DEIJ, Generation Z, sustainability, resilience, and justice have to be co-equal variables in the human equation now. We can't get to success without solving for those additional variables. That is a profound, profound change that maybe our species has never really faced before. So that's the magnitude of the challenge here. So when I try to apply that to Stanford, how can we make sustainability innovation real? How can we make it not just something we talk about and we research, but we actually make happen on the campus? We make it real. And that to me is this wonderful kind of mutually reinforcing network of innovation in terms of being a living lab for solutions, but then operationalizing those solutions to make real world change. That's still a little bit theoretical. So how does that rubber actually hit the road? And for me, it comes down to opportunity, renewal, and transformation. Opportunity in that, like a lot of places, our infrastructure, our utilities are reaching their end of life. You know, these things only last for a certain number of decades or a certain number of years. And whether it is power or water or sewer or transportation systems, we're reaching the end of life. That's a huge opportunity. And we need to renew those things. We need to renew those services. The fact that your power plant has reached the end of its life does not mean that the lights can go out. You have to renew that service. You have to continue that service to your customers. But in this brave new world, you also have, excuse me, in this brave new world, you also have to transform. Think about that changed human equation. Think about the transformation that is necessary in terms of solving that. We can't just renew with the same old solutions that we had. We have to, instead of looking backward for solutions, we have to look forward for solutions that are transformative. So let's bring this down to energy at Stanford. For many years, we had a combined cycle plant that is very, very roughly diagrammed here, called Cardinal Cogen. It was an on-site combined cycle plant that served both the electricity and the thermal needs in the form of steam, the thermal needs of the campus. A natural gas fired, so fossil fuels, I mean, albeit fairly clean fossil fuels, but still fossil fuels, so greenhouse gases and pollutants, also venting a lot of heat to the atmosphere. Finally, when you look at that steam network, we were losing about a third of the energy in that steam as we circulated it, as we distributed it to the campus over maybe 25 miles of distribution pipe. So it was a great solution when it was built. It was advanced when it was built, but it was time. We had an opportunity at its end of life. We needed to renew those services, but how do we transform that? Because not only did we have these policy drivers, but we had greenhouse gases and pollutants going up as the campus grew, water consumption growing up, end user costs going up, service disruptions going up, and as I mentioned, these really eye-watering distribution losses. So how do we apply this model to that? Well, my predecessors, and again, who get full credit for this, came up with 4 fundamental innovations. One was going from fossil, natural gas, to renewable power, to going from venting waste heat to atmosphere, to actually recovering heat as fuel, moving from a steam-based system, a high energy system, to a lower energy system around chilled and hot water, which is a real game changer in terms of efficiency and the amount of energy that's consumed. And then finally going from a zero energy storage scenario to a system that has both electricity and thermal storage. And when we look at these are really, really cool, but they are the product of a fundamental rethink of basic assumptions. Does it have to be natural gas? Does it have to be a fossil fuel? No. All of a sudden, renewables are possible. Do we have to waste this heat? Well, we've been wasting heat for decades, but well, let's rethink that. Let's think about recovering that heat. Does it have to be steam? Well, everybody uses steam. We've been using steam for decades. Okay, but let's look at our end uses and say, is there a better solution? And hot and chilled water turned out to be that solution. And finally, energy storage, which is a fundamental component of this new world of renewable energy that we're faced with. This is where it came out, and I'll walk through this pretty quickly. This is what the CESI project is. And as you can see, there are some dates on here. A couple of them just happened. We have 2 solar projects. If you start at the left side of the screen, one went online in 2016 down in Southern California. That supplied about 2/3 of the electricity for the facility. The second one just came online. We just cut the ribbon a few months ago. And that is both solar and electric storage. Those feed into the California system and are delivered to Stanford, redundant substation capacity, feeding into really the centerpiece of the system, which is called the Central Energy Facility. And if you look it up, cesi.stanford.edu, I think, you can see a lot of really cool pictures and explanations. But basically what it is a combination of electric-driven chillers, driven by that renewable electricity, and heat recovery chillers, taking the waste heat, often a huge portion of the inputs to that plant, taking the waste heat and recovering those to make more thermal energy for the campus, and then running through a 22-mile new distribution network around the campus that was built as part of this, plus some rooftop solar and local solar in that mix as well. And lo and behold, obviously greenhouse gases and pollutants come down because we've substituted renewable energy for natural gas. Water consumption, way down, like millions of gallons a day, way down. Huge in California, huge anywhere, but especially huge in California, both from an environmental standpoint and a cost perspective. End user costs, way down, even with a cost of carbon. Service interruption. This system is more reliable than the old system, which operationally is fantastic. And distribution losses have gone down by an order of magnitude from the 30% range to about the 3 to 4% range. Massive cost savings, massive efficiencies. So that was opportunity, renewal, and transformation. We had an opportunity with the end of life of the cogen plant. We had the need to renew those services in the campus, but we looked to transformation. We challenged our fundamental assumptions to get to a transformative solution. Now, all energy is compromised. Everything in life is compromised, right? And there are a couple of significant compromises that were made that we're now actually working on solutions for and mitigations for. One is that the capital costs are significant. And this is really a paradigm of this brave new world of renewables. You have very high initial capital costs. You save money over time with lower operating costs. But Stanford was very lucky to have both the money and the borrowing capacity to cover those initial capital costs. I see a lot of innovation possible here if you're a less affluent institution or government or corporate or what have you. We need to figure out how to make this thing feasible, this sort of solution feasible for those who don't have the resources that Stanford does. The other big compromise is that we have tied our electric reliability and now our thermal reliability to the California power grid. And as I think most folks know, that is not the most reliable grid. We've had incredible reliability historically, but is that reliability enough going forward? Is the resilience of the grid enough going forward? That is something that we're looking at, because again, if that power shuts off, not only do we lose our electricity to keep the lights on, but we also are relying on a fairly small amount in the scheme of things, thermal storage at the facility before supply stops. So next steps, we are almost done with doubling the chilling capacity of the plant, because frankly, the campus has grown a lot faster than we expected, and climate change has happened a lot faster than we expected. We are working on hour by hour building level thermal load forecasting, which sounds really geeky, but it's really important, and huge opportunities both for improved customer experience as well as improved environmental and economic outcomes for us. And then as we move down that list, from things that we're actually doing to things that we're probably doing to things that we're still looking at, 24/7 clean energy, the last 10% of fossil fuel conversion, perhaps lake water heat exchange, as an additional heat sink for the facility. All of these things are presentations unto themselves, but really interesting next steps as we optimize this. So I hope that was helpful. I wanted to talk through the operational and strategic framework, the decarbonization journey, but I hope you're able to take a couple of things away from this. One is this paradigm of the new human equation, where sustainability, resilience, and justice are co-equal variables in how we define success. You then drill that down to what we do, which is opportunity, renewal, and transformation. But then looking at the project itself and looking at an opportunity to adapt some of the things that we've done in our living lab of Stanford to create a win-win-win, to create an operational win for the campus, an economic win for the campus, and an environmental win for the planet. So with that, at this point, I would take any questions, but I will turn it back over to Peter.
Hey, thank you, Lincoln. That was fantastic. And it's really great to see the progress that Stanford's made just since the last time we spoke, which is incredible. So the rate of change there is accelerating, it seems. And I think that's a huge win for Stanford, for the planet, and for other universities, small cities that are looking on to try to figure out how they can make these kind of changes a reality. I think that's incredible. Would you mind if I asked you a couple of questions?
Oh, sure. Fire away.
So the first thing that came to mind for me is, what impact do the students have, both on pushing for the goals and, maybe some Stanford alumni that help on the execution side? I'm really curious to know.
It's a very powerful community. It's a great question, because it's a really powerful community. Obviously, these students are way smarter than I am, which is wonderful. And they have a lot of great ideas. We actually bring a lot of interns into what we do across the groups that I manage. But you're seeing, it goes back to this Gen Z thing of not taking no for an answer or even slow for an answer. there is a steady and relentless and very necessary push up from the students to make these things happen and make them happen sooner rather than later and better rather than worse. So that has been a really, really powerful thing. And it is so much fun and so on point with our mission as a university to bring the students through the facility and explain to them how all of this works. We're actually ramping that up. We're going to have a sustainability dorm on campus that the Precourt and Energy Institute is going to be running. And I am really excited to take the great work that's been done with the students already and really turbocharge that going forward. And then, the other side of that is that whole ecosystem. Stanford is the beating heart of Silicon Valley, the innovation capital of the world, in my opinion. And it's just full of Stanford grads and interacting with the university. And so there is a really beneficial both pressure and access to horsepower, whether it's the student, faculty, or the staff, or the ecosystem more broadly. Smart people who are really want to get these things done. Again, not just optimizing for the university, but optimizing, for the world. So it's a really exciting environment. In fact, it's insomnia producing for me. Insomnia from worrying about things. I get insomnia from just thinking about all the possibilities and how much human cloning I would have to undergo to actually get everything done, which is a great problem to have.
We almost took the next question out of my mouth, which is that ecosystem out there in the Northern California area is incredible. What have you noticed in terms of shifts, say, away from the mental horsepower, from, call it, internet type high tech stuff, and more into energy related innovation?
It's been really fascinating. I've been watching and part of energy tech, energy venture capital for 20 plus years now. And I've seen it wax and wane, and I've seen the venture capital community in particular try to apply that business model to energy, a lot of which is really not suited. It's much longer gestation, it's much higher capital cost, much more difficult to do. And I have seen a real sea change in that. And I think a perfect example is Stanford's new School of Sustainability, which is the Doerr School, one of the legends of venture capital. We've raised, I say we, it's not me, 1.7 billion dollars. And the fact that the provided a big chunk of that money coming from an absolute legend of the Silicon Valley venture capital system, to me is a huge signal that the venture capital community, the risk capital, the innovation capital community in general, has really embraced this larger change in our world around climate change and everything else in a way that they haven't before. So I'm just super, again, goes back to human cloning probably, but I'm just super excited to see all of the opportunities that we have to make the world a better place and ultimately to do good while also doing well, which I think is exactly in line with where that sort of innovation capital needs to go.
For sure. And there's been so many funds that have announced that they've gone into the energy sector, and it's both energy, mobility, sustainability, water, agricultural technology, food tech. It's really been incredible on how many things the energy industry actually touches when you start to dig into it. It's a really big, broad industry with a lot of deep knowledge. I'm curious which companies you see out there coming out of that ecosystem as, sort of early winners that have, maybe come out ahead a little bit of the pack and are starting to make an impact in terms of energy sector innovation.
I'll start with big tech. The ones who used to be little and are now really big. Google is pushing very, very hard. I really look forward to collaborating with them more. They're pushing very hard on macro issues like 24/7 clean energy, which is one of the hurdles that we need to get over. I'm not sure we know exactly how to do that yet, absent big hydro, which we don't have enough of. To make that easy, I think that's going to be a big challenge. Google is at the forefront of that, but they're also doing a lot of interesting things at the building level. And you really have to look at the whole value chain in order to create these really innovative solutions. So I would call out Google on the big tech side, but then on the startup side, I have a couple of favorites, and I'm conflicted in this answer because I'm on a couple of advisory boards of companies that I think are just absolutely incredible. So I'm probably, I can't give you an unconflicted answer to that. But what you're seeing, to your point earlier, is so much capital being devoted to this space. And the nature of venture capital investing is, it's invest in 10 and maybe one hits, or whatever the rule of thumb is these days. But that, to me, is a commitment to the sector that will produce the results that I think we need to produce. I don't know exactly which companies it will be, but when you put this much horsepower, both economic horsepower and intellectual horsepower, behind something like this, and you add in this culture of innovation, Silicon Valley defaults to possible. Most of the world defaults to impossible. But in Silicon Valley, in that ecosystem, the fact that it hasn't been done yet just means somebody hasn't done it. As opposed to we can never do, human beings can never do that. So when you combine the money and the people and that ethos of possibility, I can't wait to see what comes out of that.
Of course, this is a question a lot of people would love to know in locations all over the world, right? How do you foster that culture of innovation? What is it about Silicon Valley that lets them default to this idea of, if it hasn't been done before, that's just sort of a challenge. It's almost like it attracts more people to it. How is it that way in Silicon Valley versus, say, other places where it isn't that way?
I think Stanford has a lot to do with it. Stanford is, as I said, is really the beating heart of Silicon Valley, and spinning out so many people and so many ideas, and having been successful in a lot of those. But it's also, it's the leadership of the university, not just today, but going backwards, this real focus on innovation and entrepreneurship and making things real. But I think also Silicon Valley has a privilege. There is the privilege of failure in Silicon Valley. And I don't say that pejoratively. In Silicon Valley, failure is something that happens along the way to success. Whereas, again, maybe it's the same thing as the possible versus impossible default. There is an opportunity to fail in Silicon Valley and then do something else and succeed that maybe isn't as palatable as another. That said, that is, when you think, then look at that through a DEIJ lens, that's also privilege. That is people who have enough money to fail in something. And so that's something too, and that's probably a completely different conversation, but that's an element that I think we still need to figure out, that we still need to innovate around. How can we extend that culture, that's innovative culture, across a broader swath of society so that we can get all these brains and all this enthusiasm and all these people innovating.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up. And it's interesting how the push towards sustainability has also started to bring this DEIJ movement along with it. And I'm seeing the same thing where dollars have been going into the sustainability movement, and now the DEIJ movement's maybe a little bit behind it, but now the dollars are starting to go there. So it's really exciting to see that happen because, as you say, when there's more brains involved, you're more likely to find a solution. And this climate change issue impacts everybody, so it's really big. What have you seen in that regard in DEIJ within Silicon Valley in terms of movement towards wanting to create more justice?
Honestly, not enough. I think we are really at the front end of that. I know that Stanford as an institution has a very large part to play in that. And we are, in fact, in a very, very intensive and very purposeful, very intentional process of trying to figure that out within our own groups and try to find that model. But it really is, I wish I had a better answer for it, but it really is something, it is inseparable in my mind from climate change. It is inseparable from endemic. When you look at a virus, that is, the virus doesn't care, honestly, how well you're dressed, how much money you make. And climate change doesn't care. Climate change is, in my mind, really the first geography agnostic challenge that human beings have ever faced. Will money save you from it longer? Yeah. But ultimately, when you're looking at sea level rise, when you're looking at agricultural failures, when you're looking at viruses, when you're looking at mass migrations, this is truly a global phenomenon in the way that even World War II was not. And so even the Cold War was not. And so to me, these things are all interrelated, and that's why I put them up as co-equal elements of this brave new world working in.
So I'll transition to a technical question because I haven't asked any technical questions yet. You mentioned energy storage, and energy storage is a little bit of a loaded word. It's been around a long time, as long as I've been in the industry. What type of energy storage solutions are you guys implementing, and why did you choose them? Or maybe you're looking at a few.
Yeah, we have a couple in operation now. We have lithium-ion batteries out at our second solar project. We're part of a project, that project is called SLATE. And it's a Goldman Sachs Recurrent Energy Canadian solar project near Lemoore, California. And if you look it up, SLATE, you'll see an aerial view of this lake of solar panels, and then this what appears to be like a subdivision of shipping containers full of batteries, massive amount of battery capacity. And we went with that because it helps us better balance generation and load, helps with the duck curve, helps, it's a way for us, again, to do good for the grid, but also do well in the market in terms of integrating our own renewables. So, and lithium ion is the current standard for that. So, that made sense in that context. At the Central Energy Facility, we have a significant amount of chilled water storage and hot water storage that helps balance out fluctuations in demand versus production. But at the same time, in fact, my Ron Gower, the guy who runs the energy group for us, he and I were talking about battery technologies and what we might want to pilot over the next couple of years as these things come to fruition. Lithium ion is incredible in very specific applications. It also has tremendous life cycle environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts and costs. We are really excited in this living lab concept to take a very hard look at what's coming next. How can we not only bring those to campus, but also can we use battery technology, for example, to replace the diesel gen sets that we have in our buildings? Is there a way to take those greenhouse gases, those pollutants out of our system over time? So, again, it's trying to find the policy answers, but also the operational answers, and to create those win-win-wins, over time in our living lab.
That's really helpful. I'll ask a finance question. You've got that big solar and battery project out there. You mentioned Goldman Sachs and some others, and how Stanford's been able to invest heavily with high upfront capital costs. What financing innovations have you seen to help get these projects financed? And what advice would you have for others that are trying to get these big CapEx projects done?
I think we've done very, very well as a first step with project finance. I mean, if you look at what we were talking about in project finance 20 years ago, we are so far ahead of that now in terms of the structures that are available and the innovations that are available, the risks and the sophistication of the way that risks are allocated in those structures. But I really do, but it still comes down to, for example, with a power purchase agreement, having customers that have credit that is financeable. I mean, ultimately it comes back to those credits. I look at something like the central energy facility and how do we roll that out? How do we make that feasible, not just attractive, but feasible for a less affluent institution or government or what have you? And I feel like we really are at the beginning of peeling that onion. And I really am eager. In fact, I've been talking to folks at the business school and at the law school. How can we get our brains around this? How can we take that next step of innovation, not so much from the engineering side and the operational side, but from the financing and legal side, so that we can not only say, hey, come copy this, but and say, here's how to copy it from an engineering standpoint, but also here's some options that you can use to actually, create find the financing, make it work from that perspective too.
Yeah, it's a big area, and there's starting to be a lot of innovation, and we're seeing a lot in the private credit markets. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal from Carlyle Group talking about the demand for private credit and how that's going to help drive innovation in the renewables and in climate change arena. But yeah, it's exciting times for sure. Lincoln, this has been awesome. Before I let you go, what have you been doing for fun these days? How do you stay in shape? How do you spend your time when you're not having insomnia?
Well, we're actually in the process of moving from LA to Northern California, so that's been really exciting, stressful but exciting. But to me, and this sounds like this is a pretty geeky answer, I guess, but I've had the opportunity to do so much speaking, both in the US and around the world, talking about what Stanford's been able to do, but also talking about innovation more generally. And how do we take these next steps in this brave new world of ours? And to me, at this point in my career, there are few things more satisfying than, especially with a live audience, to see those light bulbs go on and see people say, "Oh yeah, wait a minute, I can see this through a different lens," or that thinking sparked and that innovation sparked. So that is a big part of my joy these days. And like this, I really appreciate the opportunity to tell the story.
No, Lincoln, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Peter Perry. This has been Lincoln Bleaveans. He's the head of sustainability and energy management at Stanford University, and it's been a pleasure having you on having you on PowerTalks today.
Great. Thank you so much.